Tonight, election 2009. Are all politics local, or will today's results be seen as a referendum on President Obama? I'm Harry Smith. Also tonight, H1N1. It's not just children and pregnant women at high risk. We learned today that the virus is taking a heavy toll on older Americans. What you need to know. Big Brother is here. Security cameras blanket an entire city. But does that make it safer? And auto tunes, the industry secret that helps singers hit their notes and puts words in the mouths of just about anybody.
This is the CBS Evening News with Katie Couric.
Good evening. Katie is on assignment. It is election night, and voters across the country are having their say. Will the results turn into trends that have national implications? A lot of money and manpower has been spent on several key races. Topping that list, gubernatorial contests in Virginia, where the Republican is favored, and in New Jersey, which is expected to be very tight. Two special House elections are being held in upstate New York and outside San Francisco. Washington State is holding a referendum on extending new rights to domestic partners, while in Maine, they're voting on whether to overturn the state law that allows same-sex marriages. Also, they're electing mayors in 6 major cities: New York, Boston, Detroit, Pittsburgh, Atlanta, and Houston. Jeff Greenfield is our senior political correspondent. Jeff, what should we be looking for this evening?
Well, Harry, predicting national trends from off-year elections is something like predicting the World Series winner from spring training. But there are some lessons we might learn from tonight's major races, so let's take a look. In the Virginia governor's race, pre-election polls all put Republican former Attorney General Robert McDonnell well ahead of Democrat Creigh Deeds. McDonnell has stressed local bread-and-butter issues rather than his background in the religious right. Democrats are hoping for a big turnout from the kinds of voters, young, African-American, that delivered Virginia to Obama last year, but it's a faint hope. In New Jersey, Democratic Governor Jon Corzine has grappled with severe economic woes and with low approval ratings. He's counting on a huge Democratic voter edge and some $20 million worth of mostly negative ads to defeat former U.S. Attorney Chris Christie. The outcome may hinge on how well independent candidate Chris Daggett does. Democrats traditionally win the turnout battle, so they'll take a loss here hard, as will Obama, who's come to New Jersey 3 times. In New York City, Democrat-turned-Republican-turned-independent Mayor Mike Bloomberg is expected to cruise to a 3rd term over Democratic controller Bill Thompson. Bloomberg has spent $85 million in this race, outspending his opponent by almost 13-1. And finally, there's a special congressional election in upstate New York where the Republican candidate, Dede Scozzafava, found herself running against Democrat Bill Owens and a Conservative Party candidate, Doug Hoffman. After a slew of prominent names, including Sarah Palin, backed the Conservative, Scozzafava dropped out and endorsed the Democrat. A Conservative victory here will likely embolden the right to challenge moderate Republicans across the nation in primaries next year. As for the impact of tonight's races, a Republican win across the board would hit Democrats hard, says longtime election watcher Norm Ornstein.
Where their nervousness level is going to increase and the ability of Democrats to keep their troops together, to say that we will hang together or we will hang separately, it's just going to become an uphill battle.
Now, given how tough it is to draw broad conclusions from these kinds of elections, the real story to watch may be not tonight's results, but tomorrow's spin.
Spin, always about the spin. Jeff Greenfield, thank you so much. Bob Schieffer is our chief Washington correspondent and host of Face the Nation. Bob, a question for you tonight. So many would love to tie President Obama's fortunes to these elections, these governor's elections in New Jersey and Virginia. Is that valid?
I don't know about that. I mean, he campaigned in both states for the Democrats, but I'm not one who thinks that local candidates are ever helped out much by national candidates who come in. These 2 races in both Virginia and New Jersey were so much about local issues, about property taxes, about the economy, that I don't think they had much to do with anything but New Jersey and Virginia, quite frankly.
And let's talk about this House race, New York District 23. So much has been said about orthodoxy and the Republican Party. Will this tell us trends in terms of how the Republicans expect to be running in the future?
In this case, I think it will, Harry. This is the most interesting race on the card by far, because what you have is this third-party conservative who literally pushed a moderate Republican out of the race, and she went on to endorse Obama. The Republican Party is really split, and it is the conservatives who seem to have the juice right now. It's very much like what Democrats went through in 1972. The party activists on the left were so upset with mainstream candidates that in an effort to purify their party, they pushed it so far to the left that they nominated the very liberal George McGovern for president. Now it's conservative Republicans who are upset with their mainstream candidates. They want to push the party to the right. And if this frustration continues, I think you're going to see more moderate challenge next year in Republican primaries by conservatives.
Bob Schieffer, thanks. Now to the H1N1 flu and a new report today that may change the way we look at the virus. The study out of California says 31% of people hospitalized with H1N1 were so sick they had to go into intensive care. And Dr. John LaPook tells us it's not just young people who are at risk.
Deep breath for me, please.
62-year-old Brenda Lau doesn't fit the typical profile of somebody with H1N1.
This is a younger people's flu.
But she almost died from it.
It's a miracle for me.
A new study finds while H1N1 mostly strikes younger patients, older ones are not immune.
Once they become infected with H1N1, older patients may be at great risk of developing severe respiratory disease and even death.
Researchers looked at more than 1,000 people hospitalized with H1N1 in California. About a quarter were ages 50 and over. That older group had the highest mortality. Almost 20% died.
It appears that the elderly do have some protection. They're not being hospitalized as much, but when they are hospitalized, they do tend to have a worse outcome.
Around the country, doctors are seeing H1N1 kill older patients, like Dana Fortune, a 53-year-old nurse in Indiana, and 51-year-old Gail Stapleton, an English teacher from Phoenix. Meanwhile, only 32 million doses of H1N1 vaccine are now available. Despite the new concern for older Americans, the CDC does not recommend moving them to the head of the line.
It doesn't change what our recommendations would be for vaccination, because still overwhelmingly the number of people who are affected by H1N1 influenza are people under the age of 65.
2/3 of hospitalized patients had underlying medical problems, and researchers identified a possible new risk factor not previously associated with influenza complications: obesity. Harry?
John LaPook, thanks so much. From CBSMoneyWatch.com, things are finally looking up at General Motors. Today, it reported its first monthly sales gain in almost 2 years. GM's October sales were up close to 5% from a year ago. Ford posted a 3% increase. Toyota sales were flat, but Chrysler's plummeted by 30%. National correspondent Dean Reynolds now on the car maker's drive to survive.
With Ford demonstrably on the mend, considerable attention focused on its two American rivals. And while General Motors showed progress, Chrysler did not. At GM, the nearly 5% jump over last October's sales was led by demand for its 4 core brands: Chevrolet, Cadillac, Buick, and GMC. GM plans to drop Hummer, Saturn, Pontiac, and Saab. Indeed, if they were already gone, company sales would have gone up 11.6%.
In a post-bankruptcy world where we've moved from 8 brands to 4, it's given us an opportunity to get very focused.
GM's 60-day money-back guarantee and May the Best Car Win ad campaign won some positive buzz. So confident was GM's Vice Chairman Bob Lutz of his cars that he challenged and beat a group of journalists driving rival brands. Lutz is 77.
We've got to do things with shock value that really kind of open people's minds.
The hot streak at Ford, fueled by fresh profits and positive reviews, continued. Its 3% sales bump in October also marked the 12th time in 13 months that its market share rose. Auto industry analysts were impressed by Ford and GM.
The progress is real. There's a long way to go, but you have to have a few first steps.
Chrysler is another story. Its 30% October sales drop-off shows how urgently it needs a turnaround plan from its new owner, Italian automaker Fiat. Fiat reportedly intends to downsize its new acquisition. Perhaps a good thing, since demand for Chrysler's large SUVs has basically disappeared.
Chrysler's still in the deep woods here, and it's unclear what will happen.
What may not happen is Chrysler or GM paying back the taxpayers for the $67 billion they received to stay afloat. A new government report says despite their best intentions, it's unlikely either of them will ever be prosperous enough to do that. Dean Reynolds, CBS News, Chicago.
Warren Buffett is betting big that the U.S. economy will turn around. Today, his company, Berkshire Hathaway, announced its biggest acquisition yet, the Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railroad, the freight line that hauls coal as well as TVs and refrigerators. Berkshire already owns about a quarter of Burlington. It will spend $34 billion to buy the rest. Now to Afghanistan, where today President Hamid Karzai made a lot of promises one day after winning re-election thanks to the withdrawal of his chief rival. Yesterday, President Obama told Karzai in no uncertain terms to stop the corruption in his government. Karzai said today he'll do it, but offered no specifics. He also invited political opponents to join his administration. In Holland today, Radovan Karadzic appeared for the first time at his war crimes trial. The Bosnian Serb leader is charged with ordering attacks that killed thousands of Muslims and Croats during the Bosnian War in the early 1990s. The trial began last week, but until today, Karadzic refused to attend, saying he needed more time to prepare a defense. Next on the CBS Evening News, somebody's got an eye on you. We take you to a town where it seems like everything is under surveillance. All over America these days, it seems Big Brother is watching. Go into a store or an elevator and you're almost certain to be on camera. In one small city in southern Pennsylvania, they have taken surveillance to a whole new level. But are the streets any safer? Daniel Seberg has tonight's Eye on Crime.
Despite its tranquil Dutch country image, Lancaster has a crime problem. Among cities its size, Lancaster had the 9th highest rate of violent crime in 2008. So the city took a dramatic step. More than 160 cameras keep constant vigil on just 4 square miles. More cameras than in major cities like Boston or San Francisco.
If somebody's monitoring the camera and they see some suspicious activity, we're notified immediately through 911.
Here's how it works. A handful of paid workers monitor the cameras 24/7. They can zoom and scan with a joystick. Suspicious activity is reported to 911. A live video feed can go right to police dispatch. Cameras have captured crimes like this illegal gun sale, DUI accidents, or this assault on an elderly pedestrian, accosted and knocked to the ground by a gang of teens. 2 years ago, the cameras helped catch the killer who shot 19-year-old Taekwon Hall to death as an argument turned violent.
It allowed the jury to be able to actually identify everything that happened that night.
For some people here, the proliferation of the cameras is troubling enough, but they also worry that private citizens and not trained law enforcement officers are controlling and viewing the images. So they want to know who's watching the watchers. The camera near Charlie Crystal's house can see him walking down the street or chatting on his front porch. At a recent protest against the cameras, under those eyes in the sky, he complained about potential abuse.
It's a private organization, partially funded by the city, funded a lot by private individuals, some of whom have personal political agendas as well.
All of our staff have criminal background checks.
Joe Morales heads the $3 million security coalition that operates the cameras.
We understand how serious this is and the very serious nature of the work we're doing, and we know that it wouldn't take very much to sort of damage the integrity and the trust we've earned up to this point.
However, in the program's 7 years, the crime rate has generally held steady, but not declined. Even though the cameras did not prevent the murder of Frida Hall's son, she's convinced the cameras brought his killer to justice.
If it wouldn't be for them, I wouldn't have closure today.
As the debate here continues, an un-American infringement on the right to privacy or a 21st century law enforcement tool, at least 4 cities around the country are considering implementing the Lancaster experiment. Daniel Seberg, CBS News, Lancaster.
A security camera in Russia caught a big oops in a liquor warehouse. The video shows a worker backing his forklift into shelves stacked to the ceiling with cases of booze. And down they came, all of them, in seconds. $189,000 worth of vodka and cognac smashed. No one was seriously hurt. Coming up, a healthcare giant pays up to settle allegations of widespread fraud. That story when we come back. As members of Congress debate health care reform, most would agree there needs to be a crackdown on cheating. Chief Investigative Correspondent Armand Katayan reports now on a staggering fraud settlement involving healthcare giant Omnicare.
When it comes to selling drugs to nursing homes, Omnicare has a prescription for success. A market share in excess of 70%, more than $6 billion in sales last year alone. But that success, it appears, came with a strong dose of dishonesty. Today, Omnicare agreed to pay nearly $100 million to settle a series of complaints with the Justice Department for paying and receiving kickbacks.
We will not tolerate the payment of kickbacks that have an influence and affect the choice of drugs prescribed to patients in nursing homes.
According to the government, Omnicare allegedly solicited and received kickbacks from healthcare giant Johnson & Johnson in exchange for agreeing to recommend that physicians prescribe the company's antipsychotic drug, Risperdal.
Omnicare is a company that has a lot of ethical problems. This is not the first time it has been nailed for fraud by the U.S. government.
And the government alleged Omnicare solicited and received $8 million in kickbacks from drug manufacturer Ivax in exchange for Omnicare's agreement to purchase $50 million in drugs from the company.
As is typical in these cases, Omnicare denied any wrongdoing, but the company was willing to swallow a nearly $100 million pill to make this headache go away. Armand Katayan, CBS News, New York.
In Cleveland tonight, 4 more bodies were discovered today in the backyard of a convicted rapist, and a skull was found in the basement. That's after the bodies of 6 women were found on the property last week. 50-year-old Anthony Sowell has now been charged with murder, kidnap, and rape. Civic leaders are questioning why it took so long to catch up with him. They believe the sex crimes unit is overwhelmed in Cleveland and doesn't have enough resources. Finally tonight, music made easy. It's either the best thing that's ever happened to the industry or the worst. Either way, you can't avoid it. Nancy Cordes now on the technology known as auto-tune.
Britney Spears has been accused of using it, so has country singer Kenny Chesney. In fact, listen to just about any pop song these days, and more than likely, it's been auto-tuned.
There are singers who admit to using it live. There are people who clearly use it on their records, and then there are people who don't talk about it.
Auto-tune is a computer program that can perfect your pitch and finesse any off notes, a kind of Photoshop for the voice. Cher was one of the first to use auto-tune. It gave her 1998 hit Believe that digitally enhanced warble. But today, critics complain that the overuse of auto-tune is homogenizing music. Auto-tune is so effective it can turn even a mediocre singer into a virtuoso. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do becomes do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. In fact, you don't even have to be a singer at all.
I just think it's very dangerous to have a fantasy foreign policy, and it can get you in enormous trouble.
3 brothers in Brooklyn have become internet sensations.
Freedom, 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 freedom.
By setting newsmakers to music.
At the North Pole, new satellite photos show Arctic ice is melting so fast. Oh snap, how fast? Many scientists now predict it won't be gone within 30 years.
They call it Auto-Tune the News. First, they use the computer program to turn speeches into song. Then they serve as backup singers to a host of unsuspecting lead vocalists.
Are some politicians better fake singers than others?
Oh yes, there are vast differences. Joe Biden is a very forceful speaker, and that translates. He is a very forceful singer.
Singers themselves
Every time you look at me, I know I'm the only one that is.
The Gregory brothers, along with sister-in-law Sarah, say they prefer not to auto-tune their own music.
I like being different, so I don't mind when, there's mess-ups and some off notes.
That makes her a rarity, now that perfection is possible with the push of a button.
If we all don't take bold action and take it soon, we will find ourselves on very thin ice.
Nancy Cordes, CBS News, Brooklyn, New York.
Very thin ice, very thin ice.
That's the CBS Evening News for tonight. I'm Harry Smith. Katie's back tomorrow. I'll see you first thing in the morning on The Early Show. Good night.